All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Continuous Discussions, the online forum where we talk about Agile, DevOps, and continuous delivery. I'm Sam Fell.
And I'm Anders Wahlgren. Today's topic is the DevOps toolchain. So, a short, brief discussion, because nobody has that, but we all do. So the DevOps toolchains, often a lot of existing or acquired or inherited or found tools, they're all critical for rapid, reliable, and efficient application delivery. A healthy tool chain can adapt to accommodate both changes in team preference, application architecture, quality processes, all kinds of other technology shifts, which are happening, pretty much every other day for most of the people we work with. So learn how a healthy tool chain helps teams gain improved visibility and control, as well as substantial improvements in collaboration and release cadence. As always, we have an awesome set of panelists, a little bit larger this time around than usual, but we'll spend the first 45 minutes introducing them, and then we'll get to some content.
Perfect. All right, thank you, Anders. So for this very special episode, the folks at D-Zone have helped us curate a list of folks that represent a lot of the most important tools that you'll need in your tool chain to make sure you've got a healthy, balanced tool chain. And let me start with the introductions with Prashant. Prashant, can you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sam. So my name is Prashant Mohan, and I work as a product manager at SmartBear Software, focusing primarily on our UI automation testing tools. So every day, essentially, what I try to do is make automation testing not a pain, provide real value to customers, and integrate with all our friends in the DevOps ecosystem. I think that's very important, and it's an absolute honor to be on this panel, and I'm looking forward to the next hour or so.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Prashant, for being here. Lee Atchison from New Relic, introduce yourself, sir.
Sure. My name's Lee Atchison. I'm Senior Director for Cloud Architecture at New Relic, and I focus on cloud, DevOps, and related topics, and I primarily spend my time going around talking to customers, hearing their stories, helping them, adopt New Relic, or helping them adopt, cloud architectures in general. I have a lot of experience from working at AWS previously and working in the cloud. But whether it's cloud, DevOps, or any of those advanced topics, and New Relic tries to give a perspective to the customers on visibility and how their applications are working, and I try and help customers make that happen.
Awesome. Well, we're happy to have you here. And actually, when I say here, I mean in New York City, getting ready to go speak at the AWS event. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, I'm giving a talk at our booth in about 2 hours, 2.5 hours, I guess. And we're also doing a giveaway of my book at the same time. And I'll be there for book signing and for talking to customers about AWS and cloud in general.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for joining us. Ian Buchanan, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. Yes, I'm an Atlassian for about 3 years now. I've been in various advocacy and evangelism roles here, mostly around our developer tools. These days, I'm a principal solutions engineer for DevOps, which pretty much just means, very much like Lee, I end up talking to Atlassian customers a lot about. We try to focus a little bit more on the culture and collaboration layer of DevOps. So that's kind of where my conversations come in, and I look forward to talking more about that throughout the day.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ian. Tom Smith, the man we all have to thank for making this event happen. Hi, Tom.
Hi, Sam. How are you?
Well, thank you.
I'm a research analyst here at D-Zone. Been with D-Zone about 3.5 years, and I spend most of my time interviewing IT executives on about 15 or 16 different subsectors of IT, DevOps being one of those, and it's been fascinating to see the evolution of DevOps over the past 3 years.
Wonderful. Well, again, thank you for putting this together. You and Anne-Marie have done a fantastic job.
Thank you.
Mark Miller, you've been on the program before, so you know how this goes. Introduce yourself, sir.
Hey, thank you, Sam. As you can see, I'm in beautiful California today, out from New York. I am the senior storyteller and DevOps evangelist with Sonatype. I'm also the co-founder of All Day DevOps, which most of you, if you haven't been on, you will be on. I know that's happening October 17th. And I basically just try to help the community in general around DevOps. And we'll talk today some about the Sonatype tools too, and how we can help monitor and manage open source components and compliance.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mark. And last but not least, Ravi Gadhia, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Sam. Hi, everybody. Ravi Gadhia here. I'm a solutions engineer at GitHub, based in Los Angeles. I basically, at GitHub, work with our customers here in the West, some of the biggest enterprises in the world, helping them along their journey with digital transformation, application modernization. And being at GitHub, I think we're in a very unique position to help people basically manifest DevOps in a way that's appropriate for their organization and their culture.
Fantastic. All right. Well, we're glad that you're able to join us. If you are listening in and you're not able to be on the panel, because of course we didn't invite you to be, we'd love you to join us, but we can also hear what you have to say. Use the hashtag C9D9 on Twitter and join the conversation. But for right now, let's go ahead and get started with the conversation about the tooling and the different tooling that's required. And before we get into the actual tools, let's talk a little bit about that tool chain as a value stream. And I know that when we went through this in our prep call, I believe Ian had some interesting things to say about that. So I'm going to start off with Ian. What are your thoughts, Ian?
Well, thanks. I know from about a decade ago, the first time when I saw one of these graphs, I thought, oh, all these manufacturing concepts, I don't understand how they apply here. And anyway, if I were to do this value stream mapping, it just looked like any picture of an SDLC. But I think it's very important for people to sit down and take the time to draw out those kinds of diagrams, because there are so many surprises in there. And I think one of them is in that sawtooth graph on the bottom. For those who aren't in lean manufacturing, it's known as a lead time ladder. And in this example, if you squint really close, you'll see that there's this ratio of 2 hours of value-adding work to 10 hours of non-value-adding work, which is this like 20% of the time in the whole cycle time is value-adding.
They're doing pretty well then, in other words.
Well, I think that's the surprise. A lot of developers tend to look where the light is shining, where their automation shows them, hey, the test took 2 hours. And they shrink that down. Oh, let's see if we can get that to an hour. But they're missing the time in between, the weight, the non-value adding times. And I think that's a place where, especially with this tools discussion we're about to have, that's often a place where there's a tools discrepancy. The testers are looking in one tool for their work, and the devs looking in another tool, and ops looking in another tool. And so you can't even see the wait times between them, because inside the tools themselves, they're only looking at how long it takes for them to get their own work done. So I love this as a starting point, because I think it's just so important. Newbies kind of miss this in their zeal for automation, but it's so important to sit down, draw this picture, just take estimates for that lead time ladder to understand where your big opportunities for automation lie. So that's kind of my thought on that.
Sam, the interesting thing too, to follow up what Ian said, is that this diagram that you have is one way to look at it. We found that people are actually searching for these types of diagrams to find out, number one is what I do in alignment with what other people are doing. That's a big use for these types of diagrams. The other one is, how do I get started? And if you can give me a picture about how other people are doing it, then it gives me an idea on how I can get started. So a lot of value to these type of diagrams.
Yeah, to make something that's so abstract a little bit more concrete is very helpful. And as part of that entire graph, there are different parts of the process where, as Ian mentioned, you have folks who are very attuned to a certain silo or a certain part of that process that have no idea what's upstream or downstream. And we talk with our customers and we go through this process to just sort of say, hey, let's map it out. They bring all these folks into the room and it's just amazing. Their eyes open wide when they go, I didn't realize that we were doing that downstream. And I've already done that upstream. And so why are we doing it again? So there's a really good opportunity, that collaboration point, very eye-opening for everybody. Who would like to go next? Let's see. Ravi, what are your thoughts on Toolchain, value stream?
Yeah, well, I think what I've observed personally is that many enterprises will have this. They want to enable their developers to choose the custom tool chain of their choice, and they end up having this sprawl along tools where there's no standardization. Everyone's sort of doing their own thing. It's the Wild West. It means that it's very difficult to manage and apply governance across your entire tool chain. So I think going through this exercise helps companies recognize that, hey, we don't have a standard approach. We have no way of kind of measuring our lead time because we're doing it in so many different ways. And so what I see happening as a natural follow-on to that is enterprises are looking at greenfield and high-value brownfield as areas where they would try to standardize tool chains so that they then have templates that they can apply for different types of applications.
Right. They want to lean out to the extent that they can. And we have a slide on that a little bit later. But is there one right set of standard tools? So don't answer that question because we'll get to it in a little bit. Lee, what are your thoughts?
So, I can't express enough the value of having, a single set of integrated tools that shows you a broad picture across the entire spectrum of that process. And it's, there's so much that can be learned from one side of the process by knowing how the other side of the process is working. You can't get that if you're in disparate tools that aren't working together. So whatever the tool is you're using, and there are lots of good tools, the tool should be able to incorporate data from all sorts of different areas and make a consistent whole that everyone has access to, not just the few people that might need the ops view this time because that's part of their job, but give that data and that view available to everybody because everyone can look in and see the data from a different angle and see a different aspect of it. And that provides value to the organization, just that learning and understanding how the other parts of the organization are working.
Absolutely. Prashant, what are your thoughts?
No, absolutely agree with everyone. I think the only thing that I want to add is that as far as quality is concerned, again, it's something that we have to look at from a very broad perspective, not siloed. It's just so important to look at everything, not to close, but I talk with customers every day regarding little small parts like issues that they have. But if we take that a step back and just talk to about 2 or 3 people in that same value chain, you find that the problem is much bigger, and people generally don't get that. So it is a cultural shift. It's a change in mindset. I think it's a lot of influencing people to change the way that they've been traditionally working, and I think it's always a challenge, but it's something absolutely what everyone said. I think it's critical to look at the bigger picture.
Excellent. All right, thanks, Prashant. Tom, and then Anders.
What I hear in talking to people is just the explosion of tools and the need for all of those tools to be able to integrate with one another, because developers do want to use what they want to use, and you can't be exclusive. You've got to be able to work with everything.
Work with everything. That's got to be a quote that's going to go up on Twitter at some point. Anders, thoughts about the tool chain as a value stream?
I mean, I think every time I sit down and talk with a customer, and I spent all of last week in the Midwest with one of our largest financial customers, and the value stream, whether you call it that or not, is what you're talking about, a lot of the time. And we did a webinar with Nicole Forsgren, I think it was last year, and she had this great kind of very subtle insight, which was, we should spend more time thinking about what happens to our code and less about what we do to our code. And really the way I think about that is, you want to put a little GoPro camera on your code's head, on your code's head, and then follow it all the way through until it ends up in the customer's hands and generates value. That is the value stream, right? Maybe not the only one, but that is absolutely something you'd want to do. And so think about it from the code's perspective. Is the code sitting there in the dark, lonely, all by itself, waiting for you to, help it, fix it, make it better? Or is it, or are you just sort of always touching it and adding value to it? And I think that's where these sort of 80% wait time, 20% value time kind of things come from, is when we think less about, what happens to our code and more about what we do to our code. It's most of the time it's just sitting there, and that's just value waiting to be captured.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, excellent. So moving on, let's see, my computer is now doing the little spinny wheel of doom.
Uh-oh.
So, yeah. So
I can still hear and see you, though, so.
Using tools to align people and teams. And so if you think about the continuous delivery sort of never-ending cycle of plan, create, verify, package, release, configure, and monitor, and you obviously want to do that all in a secure way. Let's start talking about how do these tools that we all represent, how do they help to align people and teams? And I'll go in the order of how they would sort of fall in the tool chain. So maybe we'll start with either the GitHub folks or the Atlassian folks. I started with Atlassian last time. So Ravi, let me start with you.
Thank you. So, with respect to this icon, this graph, I think you could definitely think of GitHub as historically being on the creation side, where we started off as Git with a GUI slapped on. We moved into more software collaboration with branching and pull requests. We have features squarely in the planning area with like project boards and issues. But really, we think GitHub is really emerging into like a platform where developers can go integrate with their tools downstream as they wish to. And then using like a rich API for reporting status back, they can actually get a view of a lot of this flow straight from GitHub, from the pull request or from whatever repo that they're looking at. So we see ourselves as pretty integral to enabling this type of flow in a very successful way. And one of the things we did last year was we released GitHub Marketplace, which is like a one-stop shop for developers to select integrations, configure them on the fly, integrated billing as well. So trying to make it really easy for people to just select, wire up their tool chain out of the box. Right? So, and code is not just application code anymore. We have infrastructure as code, we have docs as code. All of these require their own custom tool chain downstream.
Right, yeah, treating it all as code certainly provides all of the engineering goodness that you would sort of want to apply to your code. Being able to version it, being able to understand who's touched it, roll things back within the code, the repeatability, the consistency, all that stuff is really fantastic stuff throughout that entire process.
Yep.
Thank you for that, Ravi. Ian, your thoughts on this from a planning perspective, and I know you have some tools that help with downstream as well. How does that help folks across the entire process?
Our story is actually kind of similar in some ways to Ravi's, and I think Atlassian and GitHub see each other as sort of frenemies in some ways. So where Jira provides some of that visibility into builds and commits and deployments downstream, we do that just as well with GitHub as we do with Bitbucket, because we know people need to plug and play with those kinds of tools. But I think even above that, when we look at this graph that's kind of this infinity loop where information is coming in from the monitoring side, one of the things that I think we are really trying to push here in our customer base is the idea that batch size has to shrink. Otherwise, all that happens is as those monitoring feedback data points come in, they just pile up in a backlog, and you can't act on them if you have a plan that's trying to put out that's spanning out for the next year. So within our own SRE, we have kind of taken on this idea of budgeting for operational characteristics like reliability and performance, so that as signals come in, if we start to fall in reliability or performance, our dev teams have to switch to take on that kind of work full time, which actually is a subtle way to make sure that our PMs and those operational needs are much better aligned, because now the PMs want the dev teams to be working on those operational characteristics in every sprint instead of having to lose, surprise, this sprint you lose your feature because we have to work on this non-functional stuff. So I think there's something very subtle. It kind of goes back to the value stream analysis that in planning you have to think much more about flow if you're going to get to this kind of not just tool chain, but the kind of flow through the different people that are involved with these tools.
Right, all the way down that value stream. Absolutely.
Uh-huh.
Awesome. All right, Ian. Prashant, we're going to move into verify land. So tell us how verifying software and the other components, how does that help align tools and teams?
Sure, absolutely. I think verify. I think one thing to look at before we deep dive, into what SmartPair offers and some of the tools that help in the verify stage is that while verify fits logically, in this chain here with after plan and the create and then you verify. I think it's important to understand that you have to verify in every stage of the cycle. I think you've got to verify your plan. You've got to verify what you create during the creation phase itself. That's something that a lot of our customers are moving towards. Now they we call it the sort of shift left movement. As we move left into the stream, and I think that's really important. That's a trend that's catching on, and a lot of the customers that we speak to, they're like, hey, we've adopted DevOps, and then we ask them, okay, what does that mean? Have you verified your DevOps chain itself? There's where a lot of the holes are found, and things don't align as well as they thought. So some of the key tooling that help in this stage, is one of the key aspects is service virtualization. So very early on in your cycle, your APIs are not ready, so you want to sort of virtualize them and have them test ready before you even have the application up and going. So that's one sort of flavor of shifting left. And then with SmartPair, there's like 14 different tools that it offers. So touch on another couple of them. So with the verify stage itself, you think about the testing, the automation pyramid. You're talking about UI and API tests. And so one of the big open source products that we have, SOAP UI, I think is also critical because it's used by developers a lot also, as well as your QA folks, so that that the collaboration happens very well once they start using the tools. And then finally, you want to also test your UI because that's what your customer eventually sees. So the critical point here is that, hey, whatever verification you do, it has to be informed and influenced by what your customer is doing. It's not about achieving 90% automation. It's about automating the functionality that 90% of your customers use. I think that's critical, and so verify across the chain is critical.
Yeah, absolutely. And so if you start looking at this whole shift left movement, I think nowhere has that shift left movement taken on more urgency than in the security realm. And so I'm going to pass it off to Mark Miller to talk a little bit about how companies maybe are using tools to shift some of that security as well. Because it's, as Anders says, security is just another quality metric.
I'm going to try to keep my answer to less than 30 minutes here, Sam.
Good luck.
Could you put that diagram back up? Because it's an important idea for people to keep in mind. It's not just that we need tools that are going to secure at specific places. The security has to be in every one of these items here. And I like that you put that background on the turquoise background there to say security has to encompass every single step here.
Yeah.
And one of the things, and you and I talked about this in London at length when we did the workshop together, that we need tools that are actually going to at the first stage, actually be able to track what's happening. In our case, it's open source. So we want to know what open source tools, what open source components are you using? What's the licensing and governance aspect of it? Once you get a handle on that and you get it out of an Excel spreadsheet, and you've got a tool that can help you automate that process, then as you move forward through the rest of this infinity cycle here, you're going to have to monitor it once it's in play. And that's a big thing that's missing, because a lot of people, when they first start, don't realize Just because you put something secure into the application doesn't mean it's going to remain secure for the duration of that application. I see a lot of heads just bobbing here. So that's one of the things that we like to concentrate on. First of all, what open source are you using? Where is it located? And is it secure in time right now? The other thing that Ravi touched on, and then I'll throw it back to the group to talk about, every part of the discussions that we're having, a lot of it has to do with cultural transformation, because it's not like any of us as tool suppliers want to go in and rip and replace. What we'd like to know is, what is your existing tool chain that your developers are comfortable with, that ops is comfortable with, and how can we integrate into that existing tool chain so we're not having to replace everything that's going on? And again, Sam, we could go on for hours like that, but I'll throw it back and see what kind of responses you've got.
Wonderful. All right. So as we move through the life cycle here, the next on the list is going to be monitoring. Once you get that stuff out into production, and maybe even before you get to production, Lee, what are your thoughts on that?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. You know, there's a couple different aspects when you think of monitoring, and certainly if you look where monitoring sits in the tool chain, it looks like it's at the end, right? It's after you deploy, it's out in production, you monitor to make sure it works. But and you know, that's certainly important, you know, to catch, you know, hiccups that occur during a deploy and latency problems that occur. But that's just one aspect of the monitoring that's important to DevOps and to the teams that are dealing with DevOps. But it's also about the front end of the process. It's about getting data into the pipeline to support planning and improvements, and to identify the areas where you need to make improvements to your application, and getting the data that supports decisions of what you should be working on into the front end. So monitoring is this piece really that takes the you know, this what could be a straight line and turns it into the Mobius loop, right? It's the thing that makes it the thing that is a continuous process. And that's really what's critical here. But it's also a tool that helps with the collaboration process throughout all steps within this. You know, much like you were talking about the security aspect, understanding how the monitoring the application as well as monitoring the tool chains affects everyone in that process. You know, it allows you to help with problem diagnostics in the application, allows you to handle problem diagnostics within the tool chain. It gives you the visibility you need. And as I was saying earlier, gives everyone in the organization the visibility they need to understand what's going on everywhere. And by giving everyone the same level of visibility, makes decisions more uniform. It makes problems easier and quicker to find, to identify where the problem exists, and therefore making the resolution of those problems and the cycle time through this whole loop much, much, much faster.
Yeah, when you think about the, you know, Gene Kim's 3 ways, and feedback loops are an incredibly important part of a continuous improvement lifecycle.
Absolutely.
And you know, not only looking at how are the servers performing, but to Prashant's point, how are my users interacting with the product, right? What is their level of satisfaction with the codes that I just shipped? And I could have done a tremendous amount of work, and hey, I'm, you know, declaring victory, but my users, Snapchat, are leaving in droves, right? So are you really doing well? Are you doing a good thing by adding these changes to your application? So,
but also think this way too, is like you had a problem, you're running into where a problem is, and you fix the problem of the moment, but then you want to start looking at the post-mortem of what's causing these issues, what are causing these problems to occur, and you find that there's certain parts of the application that are making significant changes very quickly, and perhaps they're not going through this cycle quite as reliably and efficiently, especially through some of the verification steps or the security steps, as they perhaps should be. So understanding the visibility that monitoring can give you in the tool chain itself can give you the visibility on, you know, the teams that need to make some improvements, or the parts of the application that are working great or which ones are not, and where you really need to focus from that standpoint.
Love it. Very nice. All right, Tom, and then Anders. Tom, thoughts on this?
I think visibility from all the tools is tremendous in helping tear down the silos and promote collaboration, which we know is critical to success of DevOps.
Couldn't have said it better or more succinctly. Anders.
No, I mean okay. So that you stole my line, Tom, but I forgive you. I mean, I think that one of the key things, and I think most of us, I think even most of us listening to understand this is, you always got to worry about what's your biggest constraint, of the day, of the hour, of the month, of the year, those kinds of things. Because typically, if you're not worrying about your biggest constraint, chances are you might be doing local optimizations that are not really going to move the ball for you very much. And I think one of the key things about breaking down these silos and getting, me getting visibility into what becomes before whatever I do and what comes after whatever I do is really key, because that starts to, we start to get an understanding of what the big picture is and think less about what our little silo is about. And
it happens to be rule number 1 of Gene Kim's 3 ways is system level thinking. So yeah.
Well, if I can jump in, Anders, because you hit a really interesting point, and it's almost word like Goldratt talked about in Theory of Constraints. It was almost a direct quote. We can relate this all the way back from there, even all the way back to Deming. But what we're trying to do is find that bottleneck that's the biggest bottleneck at the moment.
Right.
Get that. I mean, I love your quote. You hit it right on the numbers.
Yep. It's something that's easy to forget in our day-to-day existence, right? I mean, I can get very focused on, well, I got to make this one test run faster, or I got to make this build faster, or these deploys need to happen in, 15 minutes, not 15 hours, and all of those things. That may or may not be the biggest problem that's preventing you from success by whatever, outcome you're looking for.
That's exactly right. Exactly right.
And depending on the outcome you're looking for, that may drastically change what becomes your biggest constraint. So it's always very critical to just understand, we're outcome based. What's the outcome you're looking for? How do we measure that? What's our biggest constraint to improving that, outcome? And then swarm that and throw resources at that problem and let some of the other ones linger for a while because they're not holding you back. And it's so insidious. It's so easy to get sucked into local optimization because it feels so good to make something that you own better and faster and more reliable and all of those things. But you really have to pull back a little bit and think about, is this the number one problem? And that's tough. Human nature is, I want to make my slice better.
Yeah.
Your slice.
So anyone want to hazard a guess as to a good way of identifying what part of that process is the biggest bottleneck? Anyone?
Value stream mapping.
Value stream mapping. It all comes back around. It's like that snake that eats itself. It's wonderful. Awesome. All right. Anyone else have any comments on this topic? Otherwise, we'll move on to our next one. If I can.
I'll throw one thing in there, which is just on value stream mapping.
Yep.
This is, if I had to ask the world one thing, before we start to try to optimize all of these things, is please try to understand your value chain. Please spend time on that. Get the right people in the room. All of them. From the tail of the snake to the mouth. Get them all in the room. Understand this, because once you understand the whole thing, you get. A lot of the answers become so much clearer, and you struggle a little bit less for that. So I'll shut up now and we can keep going.
And if I could throw in, make sure every person who's in that meeting has all the same data.
Yes. Yeah. Let's make sure we're looking at the same thing when we call it an X, Y, or a Z.
Yeah, Anders, you mentioned outcomes, and I think that with the roundtable discussion, you're talking about get everybody in the same room. If they can visualize the outcome, the guy who's taking 15 minutes to create 100 pieces versus a guy that's taking 2 hours to create 5, the guy that's creating the 100 pieces is way overproducing compared to what the outcome should be at the end.
Yeah, it's wasted effort in a sense. Hard to say that, but it kind of is, in that scenario.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So the next topic here is, it's sort of a loaded thing. Is there one right tool, right? We talked a little bit about leaning out earlier. We talked a little about using the different tools across that value stream. Is there merit in saying, yeah, you know what, there is one right tool, use that one right tool? And Lee, your face is up on my screen, so I'm going to ask you to start first.
Oh, thanks. Okay, sure. Well, yeah, so, I think all of us are sitting here saying, no, there isn't, but use ours anyway.
Right.
I mean, fact of the matter is, we all work for companies and we all have our own agendas. But really, what's most important at all is make sure you use a tool that's appropriate for your job. And there isn't one tool that'll solve. First of all, there isn't one tool that solves all of the needs of all of the parts of the DevOps tool chain. Nor is there one tool that'll solve everyone's needs for everybody that might approach the problem. So it's, when we talk about monitoring, what's the number one most important thing about monitoring isn't to use New Relic, it's to monitor. Make sure you're monitoring. And whatever tool you use, it doesn't matter. Just make sure you're using the tool and using it appropriately. With that said, I will say there is value in having a single tool for a given purpose and then making sure all the tools interconnect. We were talking earlier, the value chain of allowing everyone access to all the same data really requires your tools to be, a unified set of tools that work well together and can create the unified view with one set of data that gives you the answers to the problems that you need at the time versus conflicting data from different teams because they're using different tools for different purposes and all the complexities involved with that. So while there's value in allowing teams to make decisions, there's also value in standardization in a lot of respects.
Yeah, and I love that you just sort of dropped that dirty laundry on the table. Absolutely, we all are vendors here and everybody's got an agenda, but the idea behind this panel is to talk about the high-level trends. And one of the things that I love about the DevOps community is that there is a lot of frenemies, there's a lot of co-opetition, but ultimately what we want is a marketplace where everybody can compete on equal footing and where we're all trying to help drive the progress of the software delivery methodology because we all profit from it. Can you imagine the kind of technology that we have today? And by working together, how we can make that even better for our kids and our grandkids, and pretty remarkable stuff. So, all right, let's see. Who should we go to next? Let's go to Ravi. What are your thoughts on this, Ravi?
I think I agree with the cliche, pick the right tool for the right job. But I think it's important to recognize that the right tool might change, and it probably will change because the industry is changing. So and this sort of leads into the next slide, but if you're going to be like a friendly player in the space, make your tool easy to reconfigure or to pull out, right? So tools should not lock in users. It should be easy or low friction to reconfigure a tool chain for a different tool, right? Because the right tool will change. And I think Mark alluded to earlier, that we don't want our customers to have to rip and replace. But often you need to make changes to really get the best out of what's out there and what's available. So this is something that people should be open to.
Great point.
Yep, exactly. To be able to, well, I'll let Anders cover this because he's smarter than I am. Tom, what are your thoughts here?
Obviously, no one right tool, but the tools have to integrate with each other and provide vision across the entire SDLC, so that the team can benefit and have a big picture perspective of what's going on.
No silos. Yeah, absolutely. All right, very good. Let's go to Prashant.
Yeah, I think to Lee's point, I think one important thing is there's not one right tool, but there aren't 100 right tools either. So it's important to sort of find that sweet spot into how many different tools you need that speak to each other, and that you can get set up quickly, and to Ravi's point, you can get out of quickly. So I think that's important, and so no one vendor, no one right tool, but not 100 right tools either. So it's important to get the organization on board there, because different people want to try different things, but it's important to sort of nail down into what problem am I trying to solve, and use DevOps as sort of a journey towards the final outcome rather than DevOps the outcome itself.
Right. Yeah, the DevOps Enterprise Summit, which we co-founded with IT Revolution and Gene Kim, we talk a lot about lean and how you try and create a more lean organization, a more efficient organization. At the same time, Dora which we're sponsoring that Accelerate State of DevOps report this year with our advisors, Gene Kim and Nicole Forsgren. They talk a lot about you shouldn't try and impose your tool choices on the developers, right? You should let the developers make their own choices. And so in there is sort of a dichotomy. It's directly counterintuitive where you can't let everybody choose whatever they want and at the same time try and lean out the tool chain. So having the ability to come to terms with that, to choose the right tools for maybe there is a team that must have some specific tooling, but really to abstract it a couple of levels up and say, what's the outcome that the people are looking for, you know, between this tool and that tool, if I'm getting the same outcome, is there a way for these things to sort of be normalized so that as a person who needs to manage that tool stack and as a person who wants to provide that visibility across all of these different teams and all of the different projects that are using this pipeline, this value stream to production, how do I do that in a way that empowers the developers, but also takes the oh shit factor out of the production deployment people, right? The folks that have to put the stuff into production because they don't want to have, yeah, well, it's just this random tool chain and pretty much everything, I'm sure everything's going to be fine. They probably don't want to hear that. There's a lot of anxiety involved in that sort of a statement. Awesome. Mark Miller, what are your thoughts on this? Is there one right tool?
Oh, of course there is. What I want to do is actually make it a broader statement. Is there one right tool chain? Is there one right pipeline? And that opens up the possibility. I like the way Ann Winblad says it. If you know Ann, she said it's an API economy. And we need to be able to decouple the tools so that you can build your pipeline, you can build your tool chain, but you can plug in the different pieces. I think Ravi was saying it, that we need to be able to selectively, over time, interchange the tools. So is there one tool? I think that's just a rhetorical question. Broader question, is there one pipeline? Same answer. There's not one pipeline. There's a process that needs to happen. And then you build a pipeline around the process.
That sounds good. Absolutely. All right, Ian, and then Anders.
So I think, you know, I think a lot of people have hit on some very interesting dimensions of this question. You know, Sam, I really liked what you were saying about dichotomy here, because I think this DevOps is causing organizations to really question the degree to which they are centralized versus decentralized, to which they are creating centralized, you know, like having efficiency through standards versus creating value through variation. And Lee kind of hit on this balance too, that this translates into almost a tension between a whole org and the teams that are making these development choices. And I think we have to realize that, like, the kind of variation that exists, especially in larger organizations, but even sometimes down to the smallest startups, that some projects are these very complicated service-oriented architectures that lots of things have to come together to get right. And others are just put HTML files on a web server somewhere. And when you're doing that latter one, you know, like, some of these steps collapse to mere placeholders. And so, like, you know, I realize that, you know, like, these are very different kinds of things, but I think teams need to be looking at their pipelines and asking themselves, what is the simplest thing that could possibly work? So there, I think all of us in our tools, yes, we want whole orgs to buy them, but we're all, I think, being pulled in a direction that is having us create new kinds of features that empower teams with some of that variation. In the Atlassian world, we've spent a lot of our releases building these project level administration capabilities so that teams can decide workflow choices and issue types in their Jira projects, or have control over their repo settings in Bitbucket projects, and so that delegation of control is a very important dynamic for DevOps and Agile and Lean. And I think that's more than just the variation over time. That's a variation within every organization that exists.
Absolutely, I agree. Well said, Anders.
Yeah, I like the fact that we're talking about this as a trade-off, right? Because it isn't necessarily the right answer, on kind of day one of your DevOps journey to throw out everything you do today, right? That might be right for a 10-person organization, a 50-person organization. It's almost certainly not right for a 5,000-person organization, or as if 5,000 people could be considered one organization. So that's a separate discussion. So in some sense, because we hear this viscerally all the time from customers, especially our larger ones. It's like, yeah, we would love to do that, but then we'd have to train 5,000 people, right? That's not an insignificant investment in time, resources, materials, all of those kinds of things. And so for a lot of us, quite frankly, the reality of the world is, as the song goes, if you can't be with the one you love the one you're with. And a lot of us have to do that. We customer X, uses quality product Y. They don't necessarily love all of it, but they got so much value invested in it today that it's going to be difficult to, it's one of those things where it's very difficult to transition without putting a stop to everything for longer than we'd all want to. So the reality in the world is switching some of these tools out and picking best of breed is itself a huge trade-off in terms of what is that going to cost. And so you have to develop a plan in terms of who's going to start using it. How are they going to fit into the rest of the world? How do we make sure that, when we swap that, we don't all of a sudden have two systems of record where we used to have one, and now we're asking people to context switch back and forth, and all of a sudden it can get pretty messy. So a lot of times that turns into inertia, right? And it's so difficult to get people out of that rut of inertia, and for good reason, because it's really expensive to do it a lot of the time. So, the reality is if you're a company of 50,000 people and you've got 10,000 people in, dev and ops and so on, I mean, that's a massive investment in the current tool set, the current training, the current folklore, all of that kind of stuff. So I love it that we're talking about, best of breed and, get value out of variety and all of those things, but it's a big trade-off the bigger you get. That's a big, ugly, hairy problem for the world.
Sam, can I jump in and just point out that Anders dated himself by referencing Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young from 1969?
Yes. And I was going to say that, Anders, I do love you. And that doesn't mean that, you can take that either way. I love the one I'm with, or I'm with the one I love. I don't know.
No, I mean, it was somebody actually quoted that to me a couple of weeks ago. Like, well, this is who brought us to the dance. We got to dance with them, and there's kind of that, that's the reality for a lot of people is you don't just come in on Monday and say, screw it, we're going to throw that tool out and use this one instead. That works for a small team, but
it's going to change everything.
Yeah,
exactly.
I don't know. Even for small teams, we can't put aside that code. It has its kind of inertia, its weight, and you know what? Like, if that's been running for a long time, even with a small team, those changes get hard too. So there's
we're a pretty small company. We're a small company, and it's difficult for us to evolve our tool chain, right? And I see how much more difficult it is for larger companies. Absolutely true. The inertia is there on day one. Fight it somehow. I don't know how, but.
And let's not forget that one of the things that we talk about so much when we talk about about DevOps, but also about modern compute practices is the team-oriented environment is supposed to be self-deterministic, right? They're supposed to make their own decision. Well, how do you make your own decision? And oh, by the way, these are the tools you have to use because everyone else is using those tools. And that's a really tough call, and it's a cultural call that has to be made. And I've actually seen what some companies do that is really quite successful when they implement this correctly is the model of, yes, you can use the tool that you want to, but if you use this tool, this is the one that we provide these 80 sets of advantages for, and you have to redo all of these in order to make the other tools work. So what do you want to do?
Yeah.
Invest in building your own tool and getting that working, or use the standard one. Yeah. And so you use a carrot versus a versus the pitchfork, right? And it works. And I mix metaphors there, of course, but you get the idea. That's really what's important here is you have to make sure that the tools that you select, or the tools that are selected, are tools that are used by everyone, which means they're tools that everyone supports.
Yeah. And it can get political, it can get cultural, it can get religious, it can get silly. It's a tough thing to do because we all start to identify with the tool that we work with day in and day out. And, you can take the product X out of my dead cold hands, and there's a lot of fear that builds around that too. It's like, well, if the tool goes away, do I go away? So there's a lot going on when we talk about this stuff.
Absolutely.
Mark, did you want to say something else?
Well, I'm going to plagiarize Lee for the next week in my Twitter stream. Use a carrot versus a pitchfork.
Yeah.
New one for me.
Yeah. Awesome. So we sort of talked about this a little bit already, but the whole idea of if you're going to try and provide that carrot and not a pitchfork, one of the most important things for you to be able to do is to be able to adapt to that changing environment. We see a lot of companies right now that are like, oh, I want to do something with containers, or I want to do something with serverless. Making sure that whatever framework you've put in place to allow them to build their software today is going to be able to accommodate new architectures, new tooling, all the different stuff that's coming down the pike, and do it in a way that, again, sort of, I think, abstracts out the actual tool. To be able to say things like, I need to be able to test my software in some repeatable, consistent, compliant way. And so I need to be able to do that, and SmartBear can do that. There are lots of other companies that can do that. Infrastructure as a service. Half my team's using Chef, the other half is using Puppet. Happens to be the devs are using Chef and the ops are using Puppet. How do I combine that stuff together and have them focus not on the tool, but on the outcome that the tool gives them, get them away from that? You'll take the tool out of my cold dead hands and into a place where, hey, the outcome is really what I'm married to. And if you can give me that outcome and abstract away the details, then that works for me. So how do you allow that kind of adaptation, or how do you position yourselves in a world where there's less and less friction for that adaptation to make sure that you're consistently providing that value to your customers? And I'll start here with, let's see, who haven't I started with? I'll start with Mark.
Reframe that question again for me, Sam. It was a long statement there. What do we got?
Statement. So how does your tool allow for the adaptation of the tool chain, of the processes, of the practices? How do you make sure that you're not locking people into something?
I hate to be repetitive, but again, Ann Winblad said it very well when she talked about API economy. Make sure that our tools are able to be integrated with other tools in the tool set. You and I are working on that personally when we're building the Toolchain workshop with John Willis, so that we can show people how do these tools integrate together, what do they do, what will the final outcomes look like when they come. So for me, it's, we have a couple places within the pipeline that we like to fit with Nexus and the Nexus platform. But we want to make sure, as part of an integrated platform, that you're going to be able to use this with existing tools or the new tools you want to bring in.
Perfect. All right, great. Lee.
Yeah, the word that was coming to my mind too was the same word. It was API, right? It's APIs help you to give you the ability to swap tools out with reducing the friction. But it's not just APIs, it's also integrations. And integrations are not APIs, right? APIs, I as a company can say, hey, I have an API and it does everything I want anybody to be able to do, and call it a day. That doesn't do anything if all the other tools have their own APIs and there's no integration between those APIs. And the glue is really what I'm talking about here.
Yeah.
Really, it behoves, and this is, I guess, a message more for us, the panelists, and for the people listening that are working for vendors as well, is it's not just building APIs to make sure that people can get data out of our applications, out of our tools. It's making sure that our tools work with all of the tools that are involved in the tool chain, upstream, downstream, side stream, from all of us, to make sure that they work together in a way that it's effective for our customers. And so it's not just the APIs, it's making sure that the APIs are correct, work together, and integrate with the people that our customers care about. And that's the only way you're going to make sure that a tool really can easily slide in and slide out of any particular slot and minimize the stress involved in doing it.
Excellent. All right, very good. 5 minutes left. Let's go to Ian.
Yeah, actually, I kind of want to beg to differ with my colleagues here on APIs. Not entirely. We believe in APIs, and we certainly have good ones. We believe very strongly in having a strong integration marketplace. But I feel like this kind of misses the do-it-yourself aspect that is kind of required for DevOps. That there's something about people building their own tool chains, realizing that this isn't something that you just buy out of the box, even if with some replaceable pieces. And I think that's a cultural aspect. There's something there about people owning the way that their process works and doing that kind of thinking about, like I said before, is this the simplest pipeline that could possibly work? So I don't know, I'm not trying to throw a grenade in the room, but that's, I think there's a cultural thing there more than just technical.
So keep your team.
Well, I'm not sure those things are incompatible with each other, quite frankly. I mean,
True.
I always just ask, please, Lord, is there an API for this? Lee, I think you're being a little greedy there too, because, all I'm asking for is an API. There are so many products out there where like, yeah, you can only do that through the GUI. Oh yeah, you can only do that through the web UI. It's like, no, just please give me an API, please. I'll just ask for that, and the rest is gravy. I have simple tastes.
Awesome. All right, Ravi.
Yeah. So in addition to ease of integration, I think other qualities that would characterize healthy tools or like friendly players in the tool chain would be like accessibility to data, like both the internal performance data of how the system is running, but also like migratability of data. If you want to move off of one source code management system to another, that should be relatively easy.
Mm-hmm.
And the other things I see my customers often needing is if sorry, I might have dropped out. Auditability and traceability are two more things that I would point out as being necessary for customers.
For being able to change, to be able to change effectively, you have to know where you've been and know that you can get back there. Very good. Love it. All right, Prashant, and then Tom, and then we're out.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. I think so many good points. Not too much I want to add, but apart from just hey, what? Product consumption is important. So what that means essentially is your product should be able to be consumed in the whole tool chain, and your product should be able to consume other tools as well. And so basically it comes back to that integration capabilities, to and fro APIs, and just sort of work together and make sure that you're at the end of the day being able to give your customers something that they value for. And I also want to end by saying that a lot of times we sort of try to focus on delivering quickly, being lean, and things like that, and often we forget about about verifying the entire system and making sure that they're looking at it from a top-down perspective. That hey, things are actually working fine. And you might have the best deployment, you might have the best code written, you might have the best automation tests, but if your website crashes on Prime Day, then you're not done a good job.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Tom, thank you so much for getting all these nice people together to have this conversation. Thank you to all of you people for being so open about your non-objectivity and subjectivity. As long as we're all objective about our subjectivity, then I guess that's okay. And I'll let you sort of close us out, Tom.
And you guys know the technologies much more than I do. From a I see DevOps kind of leading the way because it's already being adopted by companies. Companies realize they're not going to survive without DevOps as they are having to handle more and more data, and they're ending up with hybrid multi-cloud environments. And DevOps methodology is just helping to help execute those plans as well.
I love it. We are exactly at the top of the hour. I want to thank all of you guys for joining, and we'll see you on the next episode of Continuous Discussions, which is going to be a preview of some of the DOES US speakers with Gene Kim and the rest of the crew. So look for more information on that. And thank you all very much.
Thanks, Sam.